He commanded every Alpha in Busan to bow, but he couldn't protect the one Omega who held his entire world. Minute J, the most feared Alpha in South Korea's coastal underworld, made one unforgivable sin during the most important night of his empire. It wasn't a failed territory war. It wasn't a betrayal he didn't see coming. It was a button on his Samsung Galaxy. When his bonded Omega, Jian, called him for the 7th time, he didn't just ignore the bond pull screaming through his veins. He blocked him. He blocked his own mate. He thought Jian was being hysterical. He thought Omega's worried too much. He thought he had all night to deal with his husband's insecurity. He was wrong. Because while he was raising a glass of Yamazaki 25 to his success, Jian was choking on his own blood. And the voicemail his Omega left, desperate, terrified, soaked in love, would echo in Minute J's shattered mind until death finally claimed him too. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the Paradise Hotel's Diamond Lounge didn't just overlook the ocean, they bore witness to sins. Beyond the glass, Hornby Beach stretched dark and endless, waves crashing against the shore like warnings no one heeded. Inside, South Korea's criminal elite circulated like predators in tailored armor. Yakuza representatives, corrupt politicians, and Alpha Syndicate heads raised glasses of imported whiskey, pretending they didn't know that every man in the room had killed to earn his seat at this table. At the center of it all stood Minute J. Minute J didn't just wear power, he was forged from it. His charcoal Tom Ford three-piece suit was cut with surgical precision, emphasizing the dangerous build of an Alpha who'd clawed his way to the top of Busan's underworld. His dark hair was swept back, revealing sharp features that belonged on a corporate CEO, not a man who'd personally buried 17 rivals in the past 5 years. The bond mark on his neck, a silver crescent moon partially hidden by his collar, caught the light when he moved. It was the only soft thing about him. He was the head of the Minute Crime Syndicate, though tonight's guest list diplomatically listed him as an import-export magnate. Tonight was his ascension. He was finalizing an agreement with the Park family that would give him exclusive control over every shipping container that moved through Busan's ports. No more turf wars. No more splitting profits. The entire southern coastal trade route would be his. His empire would be untouchable. But his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Minute J's jaw tightened, his Alpha instincts flickering with irritation as he felt the bond mark pulse with his Omega's anxiety. He forced his expression into something resembling patience as Park Tae-sung raised a glass across the room, that snake smile promising partnership while his eyes calculated murder. The auction floor was arranged like a throne room, and Minute J had every intention of leaving it as king. 12 syndicate heads occupied the private lounge, each Alpha attended by their enforcers, their scents carefully controlled to avoid triggering territorial aggression. The air was thick with expensive cologne, imported cigars, and the metallic undercurrent of violence that no amount of luxury could mask. Crystal decanters of whiskey sat on lacquered tables. Servers in black uniforms moved like ghosts, refilling glasses that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Minute J stood near the western windows, the dark ocean at his back, projecting the image of a man who owned the very water that crashed against Busan's shores. His second-in-command, Kang Hyun-woo, flanked him with the silent efficiency of a loyal beater who'd served for over a decade. The Park family's offering is generous, Hyun-woo murmured, just loud enough for Minute J to hear over the low hum of conversation. But they're positioning themselves as equals when we both know they're not. Minute J's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. By midnight, they'll understand the difference between a king and a pretender. His phone vibrated in his inner jacket pocket. Once. Twice. 3 times in quick succession. Jian. Minute J felt the bond mark tingle, his Omega reaching through their connection, anxiety bleeding through like watercolor on silk. It was the 5th call in 30 minutes. Before leaving their Marine City penthouse, Jian had clung to his arm with unusual intensity, those doe eyes dark with something Minute J had dismissed as preheat nervousness. I don't like this, Jian had whispered, small hands gripping Minute J's lapels. Something feels wrong, Alpha. Please, can't you do this tomorrow? Minute J had kissed his forehead, breathed in that addictive scent of vanilla and sea salt, and promised he'd be home before dawn. Trust me, he'd said, with the absolute certainty of an alpha who'd never lost a war. I've prepared for every contingency. But he hadn't prepared for this, for Jian's fear to follow him like a ghost, manifesting in call after ignored call. Park Taesung approached, flanked by his own enforcers, his alpha scent deliberately muted but still carrying that edge of threat. He was older than Minute J by a decade, his temples silver, his smile the practiced weapon of someone who'd survived this long by knowing when to smile and when to strike. Minute J, Park said, his tone smooth as aged whiskey. Shall we begin? Minute J's phone vibrated again. Park's eyes flicked down to Minute J's jacket pocket, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Your Omega worries for you. How endearing. The words were honeyed poison, the implication clear. An alpha controlled by his mate's fears isn't fit to rule. Something hot and ugly flashed through Minute J's chest, not protectiveness, but wounded pride. He was the most feared alpha in Busan. He'd built his empire on ruthlessness and strategy, not by running home every time his Omega had a bad feeling. Jian understands the demands of leadership, Minute J said coolly, each word measured. He knows tonight is important. Park's smile widened. Of course. Then let's not keep destiny waiting. The bidding war began at 9:17 p.m. Minute J watched as numbers climbed on the digital display, billions of one representing territory, shipping routes, and the kind of power that turned crime lords into legends. Park Taesung sat across from him, composed as a monk, his fingers steepled as his lawyer whispered calculations into his ear. This wasn't just about money. Every alpha in the room understood that. This was about who would kneel and who would reign. Minute J raised his bid by 2 billion won with a gesture so casual it bordered on insult. Park's smile never wavered, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, that Minute J had come prepared to burn everything to win. That's when Minute J's phone vibrated again. The sensation rippled through the bond mark like a stone dropped in still water. Minute J felt Jian's presence at the other end of that invisible thread, frantic, terrified, desperately pulling at that connection like a drowning man reaching for shore. Not now, Minute J thought, his jaw tightening. Not fucking now. He'd explained this to Jian 3 times before leaving. Tonight was critical. Tonight would reshape Busan's entire power structure. Jian had nodded, had kissed him goodbye, had promised to understand. So why couldn't his Omega control himself for a few hours? The phone buzzed again. Then again. A rhythmic pulse that matched the increasingly insistent burn of the bond mark against Minute J's neck. Park's gaze dropped to Minute J's jacket pocket, where the outline of his phone was just visible. You're very popular tonight, Minute J sighed. His tone was pleasant, but the words landed like a blade between ribs. Perhaps you should take that? We can wait. Around the table, other syndicate heads exchanged glances. Minute J felt their attention like heat lamps, judging, measuring, finding him wanting. An alpha who couldn't control his own mate certainly couldn't control an empire. It's nothing important, Minute J said, his voice flat with authority. He pulled out his phone beneath the table, his thumb moving to silence it without looking. But not before he caught a glimpse of the screen. Jian 15 missed calls. And a text message, freshly delivered, please, Alpha, something's wrong. Something's wrong. The same words Jian had used last month when he'd insisted Minute J cancel a meeting. Nothing had been wrong. The same words he'd used the month before that, and the month before that. Jian worried. It was what Omegas did, especially sensitive ones like his husband, whose instincts sometimes overwhelmed his common sense. Minute J's thumb hovered over the screen. Minute J sigh? Park prompted, that smirk still playing at his lips. Is your domestic situation secure? The emphasis on domestic was deliberate. A reminder that while Minute J played king, he was still leashed to an Omega who apparently couldn't survive a single evening without him. Heat flooded Minute J's face, not embarrassment, he told himself, but rage at Jian for making him look weak in front of his rivals. Perfectly secure, Minute J said. He tapped block contact. The phone went silent. The constant vibration ceased. Even the bond mark's insistent pull faded to a dull ache easily dismissed as stress or muscle tension. Minute J slid the phone back into his pocket and met Park's eyes with the cold certainty of an alpha who'd just proven his priorities. Now, Minute J said, reaching for his glass of Yamazaki. Where were we? Park's smile widened. Something gleamed in his eyes, satisfaction, Minute J thought. Respect for an alpha who understood that sentiment was a weakness and power required sacrifice. Ah yes, Park said, lifting his own glass. You were about to make history. They toasted. Crystal sang against crystal. The other syndicate heads murmured approval. Minute J drank deeply, the whiskey burning down his throat, washing away the last traces of guilt. He'd deal with Jean's insecurity later. He'd explain, again, that being the Omega of Busan's most powerful alpha meant trusting that alpha's judgment. Jean would understand. He always did. The bidding resumed. Numbers climbed. Minute J's empire expanded with every raised hand. The bond mark had gone completely quiet now, a blessed silence that let him focus on what truly mattered. And across the city, in a penthouse where the security system showed a green light despite the 3 masked men standing in the living room, Jean stared at his phone screen. Call failed, this number has been blocked. His hands shook as he tried again. And again. Blocked. The bond mark on his neck burned like a brand, screaming the warning his alpha had chosen to silence. Jean heard footsteps behind him. He didn't have time to scream before the knife found his ribs. At 9:43 p.m., Minute J became a king. Sold to the Minute Syndicate, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying the weight of history being written. Exclusive rights to Busan Port District, Zones 4 through 12, including all associated shipping lanes and distribution networks. The room erupted in controlled applause, the kind powerful men offered when acknowledging a predator's ascension. Minute J stood, his posture radiating the absolute confidence of an alpha who just devoured his competition whole. Park Tai-sung was the first to approach, hand extended, that serpent's smile wider than ever. Congratulations, Minute J sigh. You've just reshaped South Korea's entire coastal trade. Your father would be proud. Minute J clasped his hand, feeling the bones beneath the skin, imagining how easy it would be to crush them. But tonight wasn't about violence. Tonight was about legitimacy, about power so absolute it no longer needed to be proven with blood. To new partnerships, Minute J said, releasing Park's hand to accept a fresh glass of Yamazaki from a server who materialized like smoke. The other syndicate heads circled like satellites, offering congratulations that tasted of envy and fear. Minute J accepted each with the grace of a man who knew he'd earned every ounce of their resentment. You played that perfectly, Hyunwoo murmured at his elbow, pride thick in his voice. They never stood a chance. Minute J allowed himself a smile, rare, genuine, touched with the savage joy of conquest. The bond mark on his neck had stopped burning entirely. Jean must have finally calmed down, realized he was overreacting, fallen asleep perhaps. Everything was exactly as it should be. Park raised his glass. To the King of Busan. To the King, the others echoed. Crystal sang. Whiskey flowed. Minute J's empire stretched before him like an ocean he'd just learned to walk across. He'd never felt more powerful. Across the city, Jean couldn't breathe. The first intruder had come through the balcony door. The security system Minute J had personally installed, the one that was supposed to be impenetrable, had simply opened. As if someone had given them the codes. Jean had run for the bedroom, his Omega instinct screaming hide hide hide, but they were faster. 3 of them, dressed in black, faces covered, moving with the efficiency of professionals who'd killed before. He'd tried to call Minute J. Blocked. The bond mark had flared white-hot, sending desperate pulses through their connection. Danger Alpha, danger please, but there was nothing on the other end. Just silence. Just the empty space where his Alpha's presence should have been. Jean grabbed the lamp, swung it at the nearest mask. It connected with a satisfying crack, bought him 3 seconds to reach the panic button hidden behind their bed. His fingers found it. Pressed. Nothing happened. His not coming, one of them said in Korean, voice muffled behind the mask. Your Alpha chose his empire over you. The words landed worse than any blade. Jian's phone was still clutched in his left hand. He tried the bond one more time, pouring everything he had into that connection. Minute J, please, I love you, please, Alpha, I'm dying, please. The bond mark burned and burned and burned. No answer. The knife entered his ribs with surgical precision. Cold, then hot, then nothing but spreading numbness. Jian fell, his vision fragmenting. White marble floor. His blood looked black in the dim light, spreading in a pool that reflected the city lights beyond the windows. Guangali Beach stretched in the distance, the bridge lit up like a string of diamonds. Minute J had proposed to him on that beach. His fingers still worked. Barely. The phone screen was cracked but functional. With his last conscious thought, Jian opened his voice recorder. Pressed the red button. Minute J, he whispered, each word costing him everything. His voice was wet, drowning. Please, they're here. I don't want to die. Footsteps. Someone cursing. The sound of furniture crashing. I love you, Jian breathed into the phone, his lips forming the Korean words he'd said 1,000 times before. Alpha, please. The second knife found his heart. Jian's fingers slipped off the phone. The recording saved automatically. Voice message 047, 9:45 p.m. duration, 038. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the window, on the ocean beyond. Waiting for an Alpha who would arrive too late. At the Paradise Hotel, Minute J accepted another toast, another congratulation, the bond mark on his neck finally, blessedly silent. At 10:37 p.m., Minute J remembered he had a husband. The celebration had moved to the hotel's rooftop lounge, where Busan's skyline glittered like a crown he just placed on his own head. He stood near the railing, whiskey warming his palm, listening to Hyunwoo detail the logistics of transferring the port operations into their control. Victory tasted like expensive liquor and the envy of lesser men. But something nagged at the edge of his consciousness, a vague guilt, like forgetting to return an important call. Jian. He'd been harsh, blocking him like that. His Omega had probably spent the entire evening anxious, maybe crying, definitely hurt. Minute J pulled out his phone. He'd call now, apologize for being cold, promise to make it up to him when he got home. Jian would forgive him. He always did. He navigated to his settings, found the blocked contacts, and tapped Jian's name. Unblock contact? Minute J pressed yes. The phone came alive in his hand. 27 missed calls, Jian. 19 text messages, Jian. 1 voicemail, Jian. Minute J's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. 27 calls. 19 messages. All in the span of, he checked the timestamps, less than an hour. The last attempt had been at 9:53 p.m. Then nothing. Silence for the past 44 minutes. Minute J's fingers moved mechanically, opening the voicemail. The timestamp glowed like an accusation, 9:45 p.m. He pressed play. Static first. Then breathing, labored, wet, terrified. Minute J. Jian's voice was barely recognizable, stripped of everything except raw fear. Please, they're here. A crash. The sound of something breaking. Jian's breath coming in gasps. I don't want to die. The bond mark ignited. Not the gentle tingle of earlier. Not the dull ache he dismissed. This was agony, white-hot, searing, the biological scream of an alpha whose mate was dying. It hit him with 52 minutes of delayed force, every ignored instinct, every dismissed warning, every severed call crashing through his nervous system at once. Minute J's knees buckled. I love you. Jian whispered through the phone, his voice breaking on the Korean syllables. Alpha, please. Then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that came after something ended. The voicemail stopped. Duration, 038. Minute J couldn't breathe. The bond mark was screaming now, a sound only he could hear, the primal howl of an alpha who'd failed the one sacred duty that superseded all others, protect your Omega. Minute J sigh. Hyunwoo's voice came from somewhere far away. Are you? Minute J was already running. He shoved through the rooftop crowd, alpha instincts finally, too late, too fucking late, taking control. His car was in the underground garage. He didn't remember getting there, didn't remember starting the engine, only the screech of tires as he tore out onto Hornby streets. The city blurred past. Traffic lights meant nothing. His Maserati hit 140 kilometers per hour on roads meant for half that, weaving between cars while the bond mark burned and burned and burned. They're here. Who? Why? How did they get past the security? I don't want to die. Jian's voice, small and broken, echoing in Minute J's skull like a curse. He tried calling. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Minute J's own voice, recorded months ago, professional and cold. You've reached Minute Jian. Leave a message. Jian. Minute J roared into the phone. Jian, baby, please pick up, please. The Guangali Bridge stretched before him, lit up like a beacon guiding him home. Their penthouse was just beyond it, overlooking the beach where he'd promised to always protect his Omega, to always answer when called, to honor the bond above all else. He'd broken every promise with a single tap. The bond mark was silent now. Not peaceful. Empty. Like calling into a void and hearing nothing echo back. Minute J pressed the accelerator to the floor, his alpha roar trapped in his throat, the taste of triumph turned to ash in his mouth. At 9:45 p.m., Jian had called for him. At 10:37 p.m., Minute J finally answered. 8 minutes might as well have been eternity. The penthouse door was open. Not broken. Not forced. Just open. As if someone had walked out casually, leaving it ajar like they'd be right back. Minute J's hand went to the gun holstered at his ankle. Every alpha instinct screamed wrong, but he already knew. The bond mark had gone from screaming agony to absolute silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping mate. The silence of severance. He pushed the door wider. The apartment was dark except for the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Boson glittered beyond the glass, indifferent and beautiful. Jian? His voice cracked on the name. No answer. Just the sound of waves crashing against Guangali Beach far below. Minute J's shoes crunched on something. He looked down. Glass. The decorative vase Jian had bought from that art gallery in Hornby, the one he'd insisted on despite Minute J calling it overpriced. It lay shattered across the marble entryway. The living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Cushions slashed. Someone had fought here, fought hard. Minute J followed the trail like a man walking to his own execution. Broken lamp. Overturned chair. And then, leading toward the bedroom, dark droplets on white marble that caught the light like black pearls. Blood. The bedroom door was half closed. Minute J's hand shook as he pushed it open. The ocean stretched beyond the windows, dark and endless. Dawn was just beginning to break, painting the horizon in shades of red and gold that looked like the world was bleeding. Jian lay in the center of their bed. No, not on the bed. On the floor beside it, as if he'd tried to crawl, to hide, to reach something that might save him. His body was curled on its side, one arm stretched out toward his phone, the other pressed against his chest where his white sleep shirt had turned crimson. Minute J couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what his eyes were showing him. Jian's skin had gone pale, that beautiful honey tone now waxen and still. His lips were parted slightly, as if he'd died mid-word. His eyes were open, those soft brown eyes that had looked at Minute J every morning with love and trust and absolute faith, now staring at nothing. The bond mark on Jian's neck, the silver crescent that matched Minute J's own, had turned black. A dead bond. No. The word came out strangled. No, no, no. Minute J dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over Jian's body, terrified to touch, terrified to confirm what he already knew. When his fingers finally made contact with Jian's cheek, the cold hit him like a physical blow. Not the coolness of sleep. The cold of hours past. Of a body that had stopped fighting, stopped breathing, stopped waiting for an alpha who never came. Jian's phone was still clutched in his blood-stained fingers, screen cracked but glowing faintly. Minute J pried it loose with shaking hands. The screen showed an unsent text message. The cursor blinked at the end, waiting for a send button that would never be pressed. Minute J read it once. Twice. 3 times before the words penetrated the shock. It's a trap. Park set this up. Hyunwoo let them in. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I love you. Please don't blame yourself. The world tilted. Park. Hyunwoo. The celebration. The auction. The perfectly timed calls that had irritated Minute J, that had made him look weak, that had pushed him to block. It was all calculated. All orchestrated. While Minute J had been proving his strength, proving he wasn't controlled by his Omega's fears, Park Tae-sung had been executing a plan that depended entirely on Minute J being exactly the arrogant fool he was. And Hyunwoo, his right hand for 12 years, had given them the codes, had disabled the security, had probably suggested Minute J go to the auction in the first place. The bond mark ignited again, not with Jian's presence, but with its permanent absence. The sensation of a limb being amputated without anesthesia, of something essential being carved out and leaving only a screaming void. Minute J gathered Jian's body into his arms. So light. Too light. His Omega had always been delicate, but this was the lightness of something emptied, something that had held a soul and now held only memory. I'm sorry, Minute J whispered against Jian's cold forehead. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The words meant nothing. Sorry didn't rewind time. Sorry didn't unblock a phone. Sorry didn't answer 7 desperate calls from a dying mate. Jian's scent was already fading, that perfect combination of vanilla and sea salt that Minute J had buried his face in every night for 3 years. Soon it would be gone completely, and all that would remain would be this, a cold body and a text message that proved Jian had known, had tried to warn him, had used his last moments to absolve Minute J of guilt he absolutely deserved. Please don't blame yourself. But blame was all Minute J had left. The sound that tore from his throat wasn't human. It was the howl of an alpha whose mate had been ripped from him, whose bond had been severed by his own arrogance, whose universe had collapsed into this single point of agony. He howled until his throat was raw, until the sound became a sob, until he had nothing left but silence and the weight of Jian's body in his arms. Dawn broke fully over the ocean, turning the water blood red. Busan woke to a new day, to a new king, to an empire that had been bought with a price its ruler would pay for the rest of his life. Minute J held his dead Omega and understood, finally, what he'd won. Nothing. He'd won absolutely nothing. Minute J found the hidden camera by accident. He'd been searching Jian's study, methodically, mechanically, his hands moving while his mind fractured, looking for anything that might explain who had done this. Jian had always been paranoid about security. Not paranoid, Minute J realized now with crushing guilt. Careful. His Omega had been careful because he'd understood the dangers of being bonded to Busan's most wanted alpha. The camera was disguised as a decorative book on the shelf, its lens no bigger than a pinhole. Jian had never mentioned it. Probably thought Minute J would call it excessive, another symptom of Omega anxiety. Minute J's hands shook as he accessed the footage on Jian's laptop. The timestamp read 9:23 p.m. He watched his Omega die. Watched Jian pace the living room, phone pressed to his ear, calling again and again. Watched him flinch each time it went to voicemail. Watched the exact moment Jian realized he'd been blocked, the way his face crumpled, the way his hand went to his bond mark as if he could physically reach through it. Then the balcony door opened. 3 figures in black. Professional. Efficient. But before they entered, there was a 4th figure visible for just a moment in the hallway, someone who'd opened the security door from the inside, someone who'd disabled the alarms, someone whose scent Minute J would recognize anywhere. Kang Hyunwoo. Minute J watched the video 3 more times, each viewing peeling away another layer of his sanity. On the 4th viewing, he caught something he'd missed, Hyunwoo's hand on the security panel, entering the override code. The same code only 3 people knew. Minute J, Jian, and Hyunwoo. The beta he'd trusted for 12 years. The man who'd stood at his right hand through gang wars and territorial disputes. The friend he'd invited to his wedding, who'd toasted Jian with apparent warmth, who'd sworn loyalty with blood and tradition. Minute J's vision went red. He found Hyun Woo at the Jigalchi port warehouses, exactly where Minute J's remaining loyalists said he'd be. The beater was overseeing a shipment transfer, probably already spending his 30 pieces of silver. Minute J didn't announce himself. Didn't give warning. Just grabbed Hyun Woo by the throat and dragged him into the nearest shipping container, his alpha strength enhanced by grief-fueled rage. Minute J, Hyun Woo choked out. What? Minute J slammed him against the metal wall hard enough to dent it. The container door shut behind them with a hollow boom, sealing them in darkness broken only by light filtering through ventilation slats. 9:23, Minute J said, his voice something carved from ice and murder. That's when you let them in. Hyun Woo's face went pale. I don't know what. Don't. Minute J's roar filled the container, bouncing off metal walls. His alpha aura exploded outward, so thick with rage and grief that it was visible, a shimmering distortion in the air. Outside, Minute J heard footsteps running. Even his own men fled from what was happening inside. An alpha who'd lost his mate wasn't rational. Wasn't controllable. Was barely human. Minute J released Hyun Woo's throat only to grab his arm, twisting until bone cracked. The beater's scream echoed in the confined space. How much? Minute J asked softly. How much was my Omega's life worth? Minute J, please. Another bone. Another scream. How much? 5 billion won. Hyun Woo sobbed, cradling his shattered arm. And Seoul territory. Park promised me Seoul if I helped him take you down. He said you were getting too powerful, that you needed to be reminded that you were just a what? Minute J's voice dropped to a whisper. Just an alpha who loved his Omega too much? Who might prioritize his mate over business? Yes, Hyun Woo breathed. Park said your bond made you weak. Made you vulnerable. That Jian was your only weakness and once he was gone. Minute J's fist connected with Hyun Woo's jaw, sending him sprawling. He called me 17 times, Minute J said, advancing on the beater who was scrambling backward. My Omega called me 17 times while your assassins hunted him through our home. Do you know what his last words were? Hyun Woo shook his head, blood streaming from his mouth. Minute J pulled out his phone. Pulled up the voicemail. Hit play. Jian's terrified voice filled the container. Minute J, please, they're here. I don't want to die. I love you. Alpha, please. Then silence. Minute J set the voicemail to loop. Placed the phone on a crate where the speaker would carry. You're going to listen to that, Minute J said, pulling a knife from his boot, for as long as it takes you to die. Hyun Woo's eyes went wide. Minute J, we were brothers. Brothers don't sell each other's mates to killers. The first cut was shallow. Just enough to hurt, not enough to kill quickly. Minute J had learned this from his father, how to make death last, how to make someone pay for their sins in blood and time. Minute J, please, they're here. Hyun Woo screamed. Minute J cut again. And again. Methodical. Precise. His alpha instinct singing with savage satisfaction. This is justice. This is protection. Too late but necessary. Make them pay. Make them all pay. I don't want to die. I love you. Alpha, please. Outside, waves crashed against the pier. Inside, Hyun Woo's screams slowly faded to whimpers, then to wet gasps, then to nothing. Jian's voice continued to loop, filling the darkness with the ghost of an Omega who'd called for help that never came. When Minute J finally emerged from the container 3 hours later, his suit was ruined and his hands were painted red. His remaining men took one look at his face and knew. The Minute J who'd entered that container wasn't the same one who walked out. That Minute J had died with Jian. This was something else. Something forged in grief and baptized in vengeance. This was a widowed alpha with nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. Find Park Tae-sung, Minute J said, his voice empty of everything except purpose. And prepare for war. The suicide note took Minute J 20 minutes to write. He sat in Jian's study, surrounded by his Omega's things, the art books, the pressed flowers from their honeymoon in Jeju, the framed photo of them on Gwangali Beach where Minute J had proposed. Every object was a knife in his chest, but he needed the pain. Needed it to bleed into the words. A bond-broken alpha cannot survive. Without Jian, I am already dead. I only delayed the inevitable. To whoever finds this, I killed my mate through arrogance and neglect. Park Tae-sung pulled the trigger, but I loaded the gun. Let this be my atonement. Let us be together in death as I failed to protect him in life. He signed it with a shaking hand, then arranged the scene with theatrical precision. Empty pill bottles on the desk, the same sedatives he'd been prescribed after his father's death but never taken. An overturned glass of whiskey. Jian's wedding ring, which Minute J had removed from cold fingers and placed beside the note like an offering. His own ring stayed on. Would stay on forever. The loyal men who found him, only 5 remained after he'd purged the organization of everyone who'd known Hyunwoo too well, played their parts perfectly. Crying out, calling for help, letting the news spread through Busan's underworld like blood in water. Minute J is dead. The Alpha couldn't survive his broken bond. He's taken his own life. Within hours, the city knew. Within a day, preparations began for a funeral befitting a king. Biomyosa Temple had stood in the mountains overlooking Busan for over 1300 years. It had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the invasion of foreign armies, the transformation of a fishing village into Korea's second largest city. Now it witnessed the funeral of a mafia king who wasn't dead. Minute J watched from the shadows of the temple's upper galleries, concealed behind a carved wooden screen that allowed him to see everything while remaining invisible. Below, Busan's criminal elite filed into the courtyard in their black suits and darker intentions. The monks had been paid handsomely to allow this desecration of their sacred space. Blood money spent on a funeral for a man whose hands were already stained with it. 2 caskets sat on ornate pedestals draped in white silk. Jian's had been closed since the day Minute J found him. He couldn't bear the thought of his Omega's beautiful face on display for these vultures to gawk at. His own casket was empty except for weights to give it the right heft, a mannequin dressed in his favorite suit, and a photograph of him and Jian from their wedding day. The only genuine thing about this entire ceremony was his grief. "They are all here," murmured Dae-jung, one of his remaining loyalists, crouching beside him in the shadows. Every syndicate head in Busan. And Park Tae-sung just arrived. Minute J's eyes tracked to the temple entrance. Park Tae-sung walked in wearing black, his face arranged in an expression of solemn respect that didn't quite reach his eyes. Those eyes gleamed with barely concealed triumph as they swept over the 2 caskets. He'd won, those eyes said. He'd taken down the king of Busan and eliminated the only alpha who'd threatened his expansion plans. Minute J's hands clenched on the screen's wooden frame, his nails digging into ancient wood. Every instinct screamed to vault over the railing, to rip Park's throat out with his bare hands right here in front of everyone. But that would be quick. That would be mercy. Park didn't deserve mercy. The ceremony began. A monk chanted sutras in a voice that seemed to make the mountain itself mourn. Incense smoke rose in spirals, carrying prayers to ancestors Minute J didn't believe in and a heaven he'd never see. Park approached the caskets, bowing with exaggerated reverence. He even made a show of wiping his eyes, as if he were moved by the tragedy of it all. "Rest well, Minute J Sai," Park said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You were a worthy adversary. It's tragic that love made you weak." Minute J's bond mark burned. The dead bond never stopped burning, a permanent reminder of his failure, but in this moment it felt like Jian's presence. A cold hand on his shoulder, a whisper in his ear, "Make him pay." "He's going to visit," Dae-jung whispered. "Tonight or tomorrow. He won't be able to resist." Minute J nodded. Park's personality profile had been studied, analyzed, dissected. The man was methodical but ultimately ruled by ego. He'd need to gloat over his victory in private, to stand before the graves and savor what he'd accomplished. The temple grounds included a private family mausoleum that Minute J had purchased years ago, a traditional structure carved into the mountainside with a perfect view of the ocean below. Jian's actual grave was there, and beside it, the empty plot where Minute J's casket would be interred. The perfect place for a trap. The caskets were lifted by pallbearers Minute J had personally selected, men loyal to Jian's memory more than to Minute J himself, which made them trustworthy in ways gold never could. They carried the coffins through the temple grounds toward the mausoleum, the procession winding through maple trees that were just beginning to turn red. The symbolism wasn't lost on Minute J. Everything was turning red. Everything was blood. As the procession reached the mausoleum, Minute J caught sight of Jian's headstone, white marble carved with their wedding date and the simple inscription, "Beloved Omega. Cherished husband. Gone too soon." Nothing about how he died. Nothing about the Alpha who'd failed him. Minute J's casket was placed beside Jian's grave with practiced reverence. The crowd bowed. The monks said final prayers. Park stood at the back, his face a mask of false sympathy. When the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Park lingered. His eyes kept drifting to the mausoleum, to the two graves side by side overlooking the sea. Minute J saw the hunger in that gaze. The need to revisit the scene of his triumph. 48 hours, Minute J said to Daejung. He'll come within 48 hours. Have men positioned in the trees, the pathways, everywhere. When he arrives, seal the temple grounds. No one gets in or out. And you? Minute J's smile held no warmth, no humanity. Just the cold promise of vengeance. I'll be waiting in the tomb. The typhoon rolled in on the second night, as if the sea itself was angry. Minute J had rebuilt Jian's memorial in the private shrine room of their Dongbake Island estate, away from the public mausoleum, away from prying eyes. Here, surrounded by Jian's favorite things, was where Minute J spoke to his dead Omega every dawn. Where he apologized to a photograph that couldn't forgive him. The altar held Jian's portrait from their wedding day, surrounded by white chrysanthemums that Minute J replaced daily. Incense burned constantly. And in a sealed glass case, preserved through methods Minute J didn't want to know about, was one of Jian's silk shirts, the one that still carried his scent. Vanilla and sea salt. Fading, but there. Minute J sat in the darkness of the adjacent room, waiting. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the ocean churning black and violent, waves crashing against the cliffs below. Rain hammered the glass like bullets. Lightning split the sky. His phone buzzed. A text from Daejung, his here. Entered through the east gate. Alone. Park Tae-sung couldn't resist. Just as predicted, the man's ego demanded he see his victory up close, to stand before the shrine of the Omega he'd killed and savor the destruction of Minute J's empire. Minute J heard footsteps in the hallway. The shrine room door opened. Park entered, shaking rain from his coat, and approached Jian's altar with the casual confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He studied the photograph, the flowers, the burning incense. Beautiful, Park murmured, his voice carrying in the quiet room. Such a waste. If your Alpha had just answered your calls, Jian sighed, you'd still be alive, Minute J finished, stepping from the shadows. Park spun, his hand going for the gun at his hip, but Minute J was faster. He'd always been faster. The gun clattered across the floor as Minute J's fist connected with Park's jaw, sending him sprawling. You're dead, Park gasped, blood streaming from his mouth. You killed yourself. I lied. Minute J's voice was empty of everything except purpose. His alpha aura exploded outward, unrestrained now, so thick with grief and rage that Park physically recoiled. Did you really think I'd let you win that easily? Thunder shook the walls. Lightning illuminated Minute J's face, and Park finally understood what he was looking at. Not a man. Not anymore. A widowed alpha with nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. Minute J grabbed Park by the throat, dragging him across the floor to the altar. He forced the older alpha to his knees before Jian's photograph, one hand fisted in his hair. Look at him, Minute J commanded. Look at the Omega you murdered. Park struggled, but Minute J's grip was iron reinforced by supernatural rage. He reached for the glass case, opened it with his free hand, and pulled out Jian's shirt. Do you know what this is? Minute J pressed the fabric against Park's face, forcing him to inhale. This is his scent. The Omega you ordered killed. Breathe it in. I want you to know exactly whose blood is on your hands. Park choked, trying to turn away, but Minute J held him firm. The scent of vanilla and sea salt filled the room, mixing with incense smoke and the ozone smell of the storm. He called me 7 times, Minute J said softly, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out his phone, pulled up the voicemail, and set it on the altar where the speakers would carry. 7 times while your assassins hunted him. 7 times I didn't answer because I was too busy proving I wasn't weak. That I wasn't controlled by my Omega. Minute J pressed play. Jian's voice filled the shrine, terrified and broken. Minute J, please, they're here. I don't want to die. I love you. Alpha, please. Park's eyes widened. Minute J, this was just business. Business, Minute J repeated, the word dripping venom. He released Park's hair only to slam his face against the altar floor. My mate's life was business to you. He pulled the knife from his boot. The same knife he'd used on Hyun Woo. Its blade was still stained. 7 calls, Minute J said, positioning the blade against Park's ribs. 7 stabs. No, wait. The first stab went in clean. Park screamed. Minute J, please? Minute J whispered, echoing Jian's voicemail as he withdrew the blade. The second stab, slightly higher. They're here. Park thrashed, trying to escape, but Minute J's weight held him down. An alpha's strength multiplied by loss, by rage, by the biological imperative to avenge his murdered mate. The third stab. I don't want to die. Park was crying now, begging, his blood pooling on the shrine room floor in a spreading circle that reflected the lightning flashes. The fourth stab. I love you. Outside, the typhoon intensified. Waves crashed against the cliffs with earth-shaking force. Rain hammered harder. The ocean was screaming. The fifth stab. Alpha, please. Park's struggles were weakening. His breaths came in wet, rattling gasps. He was drowning in his own blood, just as Jian had drowned in his. The sixth stab. Minute J leaned close to Park's ear. This is what my Omega felt. This terror. This helplessness. This slow death while calling for someone who wouldn't come. The seventh stab went directly into Park's heart. Park Taesung's body convulsed once, twice, then went still. Jian's voicemail continued playing on loop, his voice a ghost that filled the shrine. Minute J, please, they're here. I don't want to die. I love you. Alpha, please. Minute J sat back on his heels, knife hanging loose in his blood-soaked hand. Park's body lay sprawled before Jian's altar like an offering, like a sacrifice to an Omega who would never know justice had been served. Lightning illuminated the room in stark white flashes. Thunder shook the foundation. The ocean roared its approval. Minute J looked up at Jian's photograph, that beautiful smile, those eyes full of life and love and trust that Minute J had betrayed. I got him, Minute J whispered. I got them both. Hyun Woo and Park. Everyone who hurt you. Jian's smile didn't change. Couldn't change. Would never change again. But you're still gone, Minute J's voice broke. And I'm still here. And the bond is still broken. And nothing I do will ever bring you back. The voicemail looped again. And again. And again. Minute J stayed on his knees before the altar, surrounded by chrysanthemums and blood, while the typhoon raged and Jian's voice echoed into eternity. He'd won his revenge. But he'd lost everything that mattered. 3 months after Jian's death, Minute J ruled Busan with the cold efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose. The Park Syndicate had been dismantled in a single bloody week. Every member, every associate, every business partner who'd benefited from Park Taesung's treachery, erased. Minute J's men moved through the city like a winter storm, leaving no survivors, no witnesses, no mercy. By the end of the month, every shipping container that moved through Busan's ports carried Minute J's mark. Every underground gambling den, every smuggling route, every corrupt politician, all answered to him. He'd achieved everything he'd wanted that night at the Paradise Hotel. He'd become untouchable. He'd also become empty. Dawn broke over the ocean in shades of gray and gold, painting the water the color of Jian's eyes in sunlight. Minute J stood before the clifftop grave, hands in the pockets of his black coat, watching the waves crash against the rocks 100 meters below. Jian's headstone was simple white marble, carved with words that couldn't capture even a fraction of who his Omega had been. Minute Jin, beloved Omega. Cherished husband. 2001 to 2024, his love was infinite. His Alpha's regret, eternal. Minute J had added that last line himself. The stonemason had tried to talk him out of it, too raw, too revealing for a man of Minute J's position. But Minute J didn't care about position anymore. Didn't care about reputation or respect or the carefully maintained image of an alpha who was always in control. Let them know. Let everyone know that he'd failed. I closed the Incheon deal yesterday, Minute J said softly, his breath misting in the cold morning air. We control the entire southern coastal trade now. From Busan to Mokpo. Everything you heard me talk about, everything I said was worth prioritizing. The wind carried the scent of sea salt. Not vanilla. Never vanilla again. I fired 3 alphas last week. One ignored his Omega's call during a meeting. Said it wasn't important, that his mate was just being emotional. Minute J's jaw tightened. I shot him myself. In front of everyone. Made it clear, if you're bonded and your Omega calls, you answer. I don't care if you're closing a $1 billion deal or negotiating with the president. You answer. A seagull cried overhead, its call lonely and sharp. They think I'm crazy, Minute J continued. The other syndicate heads. They whisper about it, how Minute J lost his mind when he lost his Omega. How he executes alphas for minor infractions, how he's obsessed with protecting bonds, how he visits a grave every morning like some kind of. He couldn't finish. Couldn't say the word madman, even though he knew it was true. The bond mark on his neck burned the way it had burned every moment since Jian died. The physician said it would fade eventually, that dead bonds always did. 3 months later, it still felt like someone was holding a lit cigarette against his skin. It would burn forever. Minute J knew that now. This was his penance, his punishment, his eternal reminder. I listened to your voicemail again last night, he whispered. I know I shouldn't. Dr. Yoon says it's not healthy, that I need to let go. But how do I let go of your voice? It's all I have left. Minute J, please, they're here. I don't want to die. I love you. Alpha, please. He'd memorized every breath, every pause, every crack in Jian's voice. 38 seconds that played on infinite loop in his mind. You told me not to blame myself, Minute J said, his voice breaking. In that text. Your last words. But how can I not? You're dead because I chose pride over bond. Because I thought answering your calls made me look weak. A tear escaped, tracing down his cheek. Minute J didn't wipe it away. There was no one here to see, no one to judge. Just him and Jian's grave and the ocean that kept all secrets. I won, Jian. I won everything. Busan is mine. The entire coastal trade is mine. I'm richer than I ever imagined. More powerful than my father ever was. He laughed, the sound bitter and broken. And it means nothing. None of it means anything without you. The sun climbed higher, warming the air slightly, but Minute J felt cold. He'd felt cold since that night, an internal winter that no amount of heat could touch. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, a text from Daejung about a morning meeting, territorial disputes that needed resolving, money that needed laundering. The business of being king. Minute J silenced it and put the phone away. I should go, he said to the headstone. There's always work. Always another deal, another threat, another problem to solve. He paused. But I'll be back tomorrow. Same time. I'm always back. He knelt, pressing his hand against the cold marble. The wedding ring on his finger clicked against the stone, white gold, matching the one they'd buried with Jian. I love you, Minute J whispered. I loved you then. I love you now. I'll love you until the day I join you here. He stood, brushing invisible dirt from his coat, and turned to leave. His car waited at the cemetery entrance, Daejung behind the wheel, ready to drive him back to the city, back to the empire, back to the hollow victory he wore like chains. As he walked away, Minute J's phone buzzed again. Another call. Another demand on his time. He answered it immediately. He always answered now. Every call. Every time. With urgent attention and immediate presence. Because he'd learned the cost of silence. He'd learned what happened when you blocked the voice that needed you most. By noon, Minute J sat in his office overlooking Busan's harbor, watching cargo ships move like toys across the water. Reports covered his desk, profit margins, territorial expansion, intelligence on rival syndicates. Everything he'd ever wanted, laid out in neat columns and strategic projections. His phone sat face up beside the papers, ringer on maximum volume, never silenced, never ignored. Waiting for a call that would never come. The streets of Busan had a new whisper now, passed in hushed tones through back alleys and underground clubs. The widowed Alpha. They said he was unkillable, unstoppable, that he'd torn apart the Park Syndicate with his bare hands. They said he visited his Omega's grave every dawn, that he still wore his wedding ring, that he executed any Alpha who dishonored a bond. They said he ruled Busan from a throne of ice and grief. They said he was the most feared man in South Korea. They weren't wrong. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand unless they'd lost their own mate, was that being feared meant nothing when you had no one to come home to. Power meant nothing when you traded your universe for an empire. Victory meant nothing when it cost you everything that made life worth living. Minute J controlled every port, every street, every shadow in Korea's second city. But Jian's number stayed at the top of his contacts list, saved, cherished, never deleted. Sometimes, late at night when the loneliness became unbearable, Minute J would call it. Just to hear the voicemail greeting, Jian's voice bright and alive. You've reached Minute Jian. Leave a message and I'll call you back. Except he wouldn't. Could never call back. And Minute J would sit in the darkness of their empty penthouse. He'd never moved, couldn't abandon the last place Jian had lived, and listen to that greeting on repeat until dawn broke over the ocean. 7 missed calls had become 7 stabs of revenge. But revenge didn't resurrect the dead. It didn't heal dead bonds. It didn't bring back vanilla and sea salt, or soft laughter, or the way Jian used to curl into his side every night whispering I love you in the darkness. Minute J had won his empire. He'd lost his world. And the only call that mattered, the one from an Omega who'd needed him, who'd loved him, who'd tried 17 times to reach him, would never come again. The bond mark burned. The phone stayed silent. And Minute J, the widowed Alpha of Busan, sat alone in his kingdom of one, haunted by 7 missed calls and a blocked number that had become his death sentence. He was alive. But he would never live again.